Good morning, everyone. My name is Ike Ero, and I am a person with albinism from Nigeria. It is a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. For the next few minutes, I will be reflecting on the elimination of harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. In particular, I will be reflecting on the international advocacy conducted on the issues to date. I will also be reflecting on some key outcomes and where we might go from here. From 2015 to 2021, I served as the first United Nations expert on the enjoyment of human rights by persons with albinism. In that role, I prioritized international plans to tackle the disturbing reports of ritual attacks against hundreds of people with albinism across the African continent. Many were targeted for their body parts, their bones, their hair, their limbs, because of the erroneous belief that these body parts could be used in so-called witchcraft rituals to attain wealth and good luck, among other alleged benefits. As these cases emerged from press reports and from the work of non-governmental organizations such as Under the Same Sun, the United Nations put the matter on the agenda of the Human Rights Council. The African Union quickly followed suit, adopting several recommendations and responding quickly with statements, condemnations, and calls to action. In 2016, as I settled into my mandate, I noticed that among all the recommendations made by the AU and the UN, there was a huge elephant in the room, namely the role that witchcraft-related beliefs and practices played in the attacks against people with albinism. Recommendations often revolved around the need for government to ensure accountability for victims of these crimes, and rightfully so. Recommendations were also rightfully made that government improve access to health because skin cancer was killing people with albinism worldwide in numbers far higher than those of ritual attacks. However, it seemed to me that for these recommendations to be robustly implemented, an awareness and integration of witchcraft-related belief and practices was necessary. Witchcraft-related beliefs and practices were, from my preliminary research, one of the root causes of the other human rights issues faced by people with albinism and others with similar misunderstood disabilities and conditions. My sensitivity to this issue was not only shaped by its causal factor in the ritual attacks faced by people with albinism, it was also triggered by my growing up in Nigeria, where I had witnessed the mob go after people accused of witchcraft, and this had disturbed me tremendously. Then I was a child and felt helpless to do anything about it. Now I was holding an international mandate as an African. I had albinism and I had global exposure. The timing and the opportunity were right. Therefore, between 2016 and 2018, with the Witchcraft and Human Rights Information Network, among others, some of you who are here in this workshop, we together conducted several events at the United Nations in Geneva to raise the alarm on the issue. These experiences revealed some degree of awareness on so-called witchcraft because some UN experts had reported on these crimes. However, it soon became clear that there was a lack of consensus around the term witchcraft, especially in the context of the human rights framework, which does not only protect potential victims, but also protects the freedom of belief and thought, including belief in witchcraft. That said, there was sufficient commonalities globally that ultimately helped us to form a consensus around the issues. No matter where you looked, harmful practices related to witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks often involved a health condition or an impairment that was not understood, whether it was dementia, autism, or albinism. It involved a marginalized group or an individual in a vulnerable situation, such as neglected children or orphans, widows, and so on. Often there was someone influential a religious, traditional, or other community leader taking advantage of the situation by creating myths and supernatural theories around these people in vulnerable situations. And above all, there was widespread but erroneous belief in the ability of these individuals in vulnerable situations to harness a supernatural force to change concrete realities in the communities, often for the worse. These commonalities gave us the impetus to continue joint advocacy on this matter, even though we were all from different parts of the world, with different manifestations of these issues at the local level. One of the milestones we achieved together was the first ever international workshop in Geneva, which was attended by the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights. Several ambassadors, including from Sierra Leone and Canada, supported the workshop. UN experts on women, on extrajudicial and summary executions participated, as well as the special representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children. Several panels featuring academics, civil society, religious leaders, and artists highlighted the issues from their perspectives, showing the international scope of the matter and giving us assurance that the common elements we saw were likely valid. A second international workshop hosted by Dr. Baker at Lancaster University led to an emerging consensus that we do not need to have a universally uniform definition of witchcraft to protect people in vulnerable situations from harmful practices. Therefore, we arrived at a viable consensus that witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks be developed within the framework of harmful practices. Harmful practices were already recognized in international human rights law with certain criteria which fit our issues well. The concept of harmful practices was also an effective strategy because it contains underlying principles that address certain complexities that we had been tackling with. For instance, harmful practices promotes the principle that culture and tradition can never be an excuse for practices that are harmful, or the principle that freedom of religion or belief does not extend to actions that inflict harm on others. Armed with this rough conceptualization, our international advocacy was intensified and culminated in several key outcomes. First was the gathering of preliminary data to support further advocacy. The data revealed tens of thousands of cases of harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks across at least 5 continents. The second thing was the historic resolution adopted in 2021 at the UN Human Rights Council, Resolution 47/8, titled Elimination of Harmful Practices Related to Accusations of Witchcraft and Ritual Attacks. This was the first ever UN resolution on the issue. The resolution also mandated that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights produce a report analyzing the issues identified in the resolution. The third outcome was the adoption by the Pan-African Parliament of the first ever guidelines on accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks, which my mandate supported through several visits to the Parliament and with the support of the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. Soon after, this network, TINA AWAHP, was formed under the leadership of Dr. Miranda Forsyth. These achievements took a tremendous amount of collaborative effort and strategic advocacy. They were also expensive endeavors, but partnerships and ongoing collaborations helped to surmount some of the resource barriers. Today, I am optimistic that these milestones could be further converted into outcomes to diminish and ultimately to eliminate these harmful practices. Some of these opportunities and next steps could include: 1, the ongoing popularization of the UN resolution through social media campaigns to improve public understanding about the concept of harmful practices as it pertains to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. Here, creative means could be employed such as infographics and digital storytelling. These could be used to show the protections that remain for cultural rights, freedom of religion and or belief, but also the protections against actions that convert these beliefs into harmful practices. 2, there is a need for cross-movement collaboration. For example, we need to work with children and women movements to integrate the issues of harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks into their ongoing work on other harmful practices such as early childhood marriage and female genital cutting. 3, we need to popularize and conduct strategic advocacy to replicate the guidelines of the Pan-African Parliament in other regional human rights frameworks, such as in Asia, in the Pacific, and South America. 4th, there is a need to continue to gather data from across the world to support advocacy efforts. 5th, the engagement of grassroots organizations working to prevent these harmful practices, supporting them to engage with strategic mechanisms at the UN and the AU, among others, such as the committees and special experts and rapporteurs working on issues pertaining to women, children, people with disabilities, violence against women, violence against children, extrajudicial killings, among others. 6, the bringing of a test case before the UN committees, which could lead to a ruling in favor of people or a person who has been victimized by these harmful practices. This ruling could facilitate concrete remedies for survivors and their family members and further awareness of the issue among member states of these organizations. 7, there is also the opportunity to develop partnerships with campaign organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. These organizations are increasingly working on issues pertaining to the elderly, who we know are especially vulnerable to these harmful practices. 8, we need to ensure participation in dialogues on climate change and climate justice, because we know that natural disasters trigger socioeconomic pressures, which in turn tend to escalate accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks, as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. Efforts could focus on integrating the issues into ongoing discussions on groups at risk, as well as into the work of the working group on local communities and indigenous peoples. In carrying out these steps that I've enlisted as suggestions, some key approaches to consider include: 1, a strategic cross-movement approach, which I briefly alluded to earlier, to ensure mutual realization of human rights goals within existing programs and resources, and to leverage these as a vehicle for scaling the outcomes achieved to date. This implies the need for an intersectoral approach to research and data gathering processes as an impetus for other movements to participate in ending these harmful practices and crimes. Lastly, we need strategic advocacy. This is a necessary approach for when and how to act, when and how to use limited resources. This requires ongoing exercises to think together, like this one. I encourage Tina AWAHP to continue to organize these workshops or other opportunities for knowledge exchanges, including collaborations with Centers for Human Rights, which are a growing phenomenon in law faculties at universities across the world. These can play a significant role in developing the requisite capacity for strategic advocacy at the grassroots and for community organizations, as well as for Tina AWAHP. Despite the large number of outcomes achieved to date and the still large volume of work ahead, I am confident that the tide has turned on this issue. Together, we have laid a solid conceptual and institutional foundation. The next steps, some of which have been suggested above, are not only for us, but also for generations after us. Because the journey ahead is long, and there is a need for sustainable progress, we need to find new allies. As the saying goes, If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. I thank you for having me join you today, and I wish you very good deliberations for the rest of the program. Bye for now.